It began with an act of stunning, almost casual Roman arrogance. A queen, recently widowed, was publicly flogged, and her daughters, little more than children, were brutally violated by Roman soldiers. To the occupiers, this was simply business as usual, a harsh but necessary lesson in submission for a troublesome tribe on the furthest fringe of their vast domain. They believed they were asserting control, reminding a lesser people of their place. Instead, they unleashed a catastrophic storm of fury, a whirlwind of vengeance that would burn their corner of the empire to the very ground. This is the story of how one woman's unspeakable private tragedy fueled a public rebellion that brought the mighty Roman Empire, the undisputed superpower of the ancient world, to its knees. This is the story of Boudica. Back in the middle of the 1st century AD, Britain was a fractured, mist-shrouded land on the very edge of the known world. It was a place of proud, fiercely independent Celtic tribes, a mosaic of kingdoms and cultures all living under the shadow of the Roman eagle, which had arrived less than 2 decades earlier. Among these tribes were the Iceni of East Anglia, a people known for their distinctive coins and proud warrior traditions. For years, they had managed to keep a tense but stable peace with the Roman invaders, existing in the precarious state known as a client kingdom. Their king, Prasutagus, spent his reign walking a dangerous political tightrope. He ruled his people, certainly, but he did so entirely at Rome's pleasure. His primary, all-consuming goal was simple: keep his kingdom intact, maintain the peace, and above all, protect his family, his wife, Queen Boudica, and their 2 young daughters. Prasutagus was a pragmatist. He understood the futility of open resistance against Rome's legions and chose a path of alliance and cooperation. He believed this was the only way to shield the Iceni from the fate of other tribes who had been crushed and absorbed. Around the year AD 60, knowing his health was failing and his time was short, he drafted a will that represented a massive political gamble, the final move of a long and careful game. He named the Roman emperor himself, the infamous Nero, as a co-heir to his kingdom, right alongside his own daughters. The logic, from Prasutagus's perspective, seemed sound, even clever. By giving the emperor a direct, personal stake in the Iceni lands, he hoped Rome would have every reason to protect his family and honor the autonomy of his kingdom. It was intended as a final gesture of friendship and loyalty, a testament to a lifetime of diplomacy. He was dead wrong. To the Roman officials on the ground, the king's will was not a gift to be respected, it was an admission of weakness to be exploited. The local procurator, the man in charge of the province's financial affairs, was a notoriously greedy and rapacious official named Quintus Decianus. He saw the king's death not as a moment for careful diplomacy, but as a golden opportunity to enrich himself and expand Roman territory. He declared Prasutagus's will null and void, proclaiming the entire Iceni kingdom formally annexed, its lands and properties now belonging to Rome. Roman soldiers, acting on the procurator's authority, descended on the royal household like vultures. What followed was a systematic and brutal dismantling of the Iceni power structure. The tribal nobility were unceremoniously stripped of their ancestral homes, their wealth confiscated, and they were treated like common slaves. Even the king's own relatives were rounded up and enslaved, a profound humiliation for a proud people. But for Boudica and her children, the humiliation was far more personal and infinitely more brutal. In a calculated act of dominance, one designed specifically to break the Iceni spirit and extinguish any thought of defiance, Roman soldiers seized their queen. Boudica was publicly stripped before her people and flogged, her back laid open by the biting leather of Roman whips. Her 2 young daughters were dragged away and systematically raped by the soldiers, a horrific violation meant to shatter the royal bloodline and assert ultimate power. This was more than an insult. It was a declaration of war. It was a line crossed with unimaginable cruelty. The Romans, in their arrogance, believed they had crushed the Iceni spirit forever and shown all of Britain the terrible price of defiance. They could not have been more mistaken. In that single moment of unimaginable pain, humiliation, and degradation, a grieving widow was transformed into a warrior. The fire of a rebellion was lit, not for territory or for power, but from the searing, white-hot pain of a mother whose children had been so horrifically brutalized. News of the atrocities committed against the Iceni royal family spread like wildfire across the damp fields and through the dense forests of Britain. Boudica, her body still bearing the raw, bloody welts from the Roman whips, refused to be broken or to hide in her grief. She emerged from her ordeal as a figure of terrifying resolve. The Roman historian Cassius Dio, writing decades after the events, painted an intimidating picture of her, a woman of great height, with a piercing gaze that seemed to look right through you. He described her as having a harsh, commanding voice and a great, shocking mass of reddish-gold hair that fell like a cloak all the way to her hips. Around her neck, she wore a heavy golden torque, the traditional Celtic symbol of her noble status. She was no longer just a queen. She was a living, breathing symbol of her people's suffering and their burning, unquenchable desire for justice. With a power born of rage, she began to rally the tribes. Her voice, once perhaps reserved for courtly matters, now rang out with chilling authority in the tribal councils. She spoke of their lost freedom, of the endless, insatiable greed of the Roman tax collectors, and the unbearable daily arrogance of the military occupation. But it was her own story, the visceral, horrifying story of her own scourged body and the violation of her innocent daughters, that struck the deepest chord. As the historian Tacitus, our other key source, recorded, she made it devastatingly clear she was not fighting for her lost kingdom or noble status. She was fighting as one of the people, avenging lost freedom, my scourged body, the outraged chastity of my daughters. Her raw and powerful plea ignited a spark. The Iceni rose up as one, their simmering resentment now a roaring blaze. Soon, their neighbors, the Trinovants, joined them. They had their own long list of grievances against Rome. The Romans had stolen their tribal capital, Camulodunum, what we now call Colchester, and callously transformed it into a colonia, a settlement for retired legionaries. The native Britons had been kicked out of their own homes to make way for the veterans, who treated them with contempt. And in the center of the city, a constant, mocking reminder of their subjugation stood, a massive, gleaming temple dedicated to the Emperor Claudius, the very man who had conquered them less than 2 decades before. Built at great expense to the local population, this temple was a stone and marble monument to their humiliation. This city, this ultimate symbol of Roman arrogance, would be their first target. A tribal army, thousands strong and united by a shared hatred, began to form. And at its head, riding in her war chariot with her violated daughters by her side as a terrible, living testament to Roman cruelty, was Boudica. The storm was about to break. As it happened, the timing of the revolt could not have been better for the Britons, or worse for the Romans. The Roman governor of Britain, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, a tough, experienced, and highly competent commander, was hundreds of miles away. He had taken his best legions to the remote island of Mona, now Anglesey in Wales, to wipe out a major stronghold of the Druids, the Celtic priests who were seen by Rome as intellectual instigators of anti-Roman resistance. With Suetonius and his elite troops occupied, Camulodunum was dangerously exposed. It was designed as a retirement town for veterans, a symbol of Roman prestige, not a fortified military base ready for a siege. When Boudica's massive, furious rebel army appeared on the horizon, the city was thrown into a state of complete panic. The retired soldiers and Roman officials sent a desperate plea for help to the procurator, Catus Decianus, the man whose greed had started the firestorm. He responded by sending a pathetic force of only 200 poorly equipped soldiers. They didn't stand a chance against the sheer fury of the Britons. The rebel army swarmed the city and unleashed a tidal wave of destruction. Modern archaeology confirms the chilling accounts of the Roman historians. A thick, black layer of burnt material and debris still marks the ground where Boudica's attack took place, a scar on the earth that has lasted 2 millennia. Buildings were torn down, and the people inside were slaughtered without mercy. A small group of last defenders held out for 2 desperate days inside the stone temple of Claudius before the rebels finally broke through, killing everyone inside and leveling the hated building. Word of the disaster reached the Roman 9th Legion, which raced south to try and save the city. But Boudica's forces were ready. They laid a trap, ambushing the legion on the road. In a stunning victory for the Britons, the Roman infantry was almost entirely wiped out. The commander and a few of his cavalrymen barely escaped with their lives. This victory sent a shockwave of terror and elation across the province. The rebel army swelled with new volunteers, and the hated procurator, Catus Decianus, fled in terror across the Channel to Gaul. When Suetonius finally heard the catastrophic news, he abandoned his campaign against the Druids and marched his forces south at incredible speed. He made it to Londinium, the bustling, 20-year-old trading hub we now call London. But one look at the sheer size of Boudica's approaching army told him everything he needed to know. With his limited forces, he could not hope to defend the sprawling, unfortified city. In a cold, calculated, and brutal military decision, he chose to save his army and abandon Londinium to its fate, taking with him any who could flee. What followed was a repeat of the horror at Camulodunum. Boudica's army fell upon the city, and according to Tacitus, they took no prisoners. This was not a campaign of conquest, it was one of pure extermination. Anyone who hadn't fled with Suetonius was killed. The city was burned so intensely that the red and black destruction layer is still visible to archaeologists today, over a meter thick in some spots. From London, the river of fire and vengeance flowed to Verulamium, modern St. Albans, another pro-Roman settlement. It too was razed to the ground. In just a few weeks, 3 of Roman Britain's most important urban centers were little more than smoking, corpse-strewn ruins. An estimated 70,000 to 80,000 Romans and their allies had been killed in the rampage. Boudica had exacted her terrifying, bloody revenge. Suetonius had been forced to make an agonizing choice, sacrificing cities full of civilians to preserve his army. Now, the entire fate of Roman Britain would come down to one last, decisive battle. He gathered what forces he could muster, the battle-hardened 14th Legion, parts of the 20th, and any nearby auxiliaries he could find, for a total of about 10,000 disciplined, professional soldiers. He was hopelessly outnumbered. The historian Cassius Dio claims Boudica's army had swelled to over 200,000 strong. While this is almost certainly an exaggeration to make the eventual Roman victory seem more heroic, the point stands. The Britons possessed a vast numerical superiority. They were so confident of victory that they had brought their families in thousands of wagons, parking them in a great crescent at the edge of the battlefield to watch the final destruction of the last Roman army in Britain. Suetonius, a master tactician, knew he couldn't win a straight fight on an open plain. He had to choose his ground perfectly. While the exact location of the battle is lost to history, Tacitus tells us that Suetonius picked a spot in a narrow valley, or defile, with a dense forest protecting his back and flanks. This was a stroke of tactical genius. It meant the Britons couldn't use their superior numbers to surround him. Their only option was to charge straight into the teeth of his legions. The battle began with a deafening roar as the Britons surged forward, a massive, disorganized wave of bodies and iron. The Roman legions stood firm, an unmoving wall of shields and steel. As the horde got closer, the Romans unleashed a devastating volley of their heavy javelins, their pila. These specially designed weapons punched through the Britons' shields and armor, their bent metal shafts making them impossible to pull out, rendering the shields useless and throwing the charging ranks into chaos. Then, Suetonius gave the order. The legions advanced in their classic wedge formation, a disciplined and relentless machine of death designed to slice into the heart of an enemy force. The sheer, organized violence of the Roman charge shattered the British line. The Britons, whose warfare thrived on fast, chaotic raids and surprise attacks, had no answer for a head-on collision with the professional meat grinder of a Roman legion in close-quarters combat. Their charge broken, they turned and tried to flee, only to find their escape route hopelessly blocked by the thousands of wagons filled with their own families, a trap of their own making. The rout turned into a horrific massacre. The Roman soldiers, having endured weeks of terror and witnessed the destruction of their cities, showed no mercy. They slaughtered warriors and civilians alike, cutting down men, women, and even the baggage animals in a final, terrible act of retribution. Boudica survived the battle, but her army was annihilated. Her rebellion was over. What happened to her next is unclear, as our two main Roman sources disagree. Tacitus says she took poison, choosing a quick death over the ultimate humiliation of being captured and paraded through the streets of Rome in chains. Cassius Dio, however, says she fell ill and died shortly after the defeat, and was given a lavish burial by her surviving followers. Whatever the cause, her end was the same. The warrior queen who had terrorized an empire and burned its province to the ground was dead. If you found this story of defiance as powerful as we do, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more stories of incredible historical figures, and share this video with someone who needs to hear a story about the unyielding power of fighting back. In the immediate aftermath of the rebellion, Rome's revenge was predictably brutal, and Suetonius's punitive campaigns continued until he was replaced by a more conciliatory governor. The uprising, which had nearly driven Rome from Britain entirely, had taught the empire a valuable, if costly, lesson. It could not hold the province through sheer force and brutal arrogance alone. Over time, Rome gradually adopted a more cautious and fair approach to governing Britain, a silent, pragmatic admission that Boudica's unimaginable rage was born from real and unforgivable grievances. For many centuries, Boudica's story wasn't widely celebrated. It was kept alive only in the Latin texts of the very Roman historians who had chronicled her defeat. Her story was rediscovered during the Renaissance, and Queen Elizabeth I, another powerful queen defending her island nation from a mighty European power, saw a powerful parallel and used Boudica's image to strengthen her own. But it was during the Victorian era that she was truly reborn as a national icon. To the Victorians, who were forging their own global empire, Boudica was the ultimate symbol of British liberty and a fierce, native fighting spirit. It was then, in the 1850s, that Prince Albert himself commissioned the iconic bronze statue of her and her daughters riding high in their war chariot. Today it stands proudly at Westminster Bridge, right next to the Houses of Parliament, a permanent and powerful monument to the queen who dared to defy an empire. In the modern age, her legacy has only grown more potent. She became a potent icon for the suffragettes in the early 20th century, a symbol of female strength and the righteous struggle for freedom. Today, she is remembered as a national heroine, a feminist icon, and a universal symbol of resistance against tyranny and oppression. So, did Boudica lose her war? In the short term, yes. Her rebellion was crushed with brutal finality. But in the long run, she won a kind of immortality. Her name, once a source of terror to Rome, is now a global symbol of the enduring human spirit. Her story is a timeless and powerful reminder that the spark of rebellion, once lit by personal tragedy and injustice, can burn its way through history itself.